What if the life you were living was only half the story? What if a secret, buried for decades, held the key not only to your past, but to a future you could never have imagined? For one young waitress, a single, chance encounter didn't just change her life. It uncovered a truth so profound it threatened to shatter one of the wealthiest dynasties in the country. This is a story about a forgotten painting, a love torn apart by greed, and a test of character so demanding it could either break a lonely heart or finally make a family whole. Alara traced the rim of a coffee cup with a damp cloth, the motion automatic, her mind miles away. Each clink of cutlery, each low murmur of conversation in the greasy spoon diner was the soundtrack to her exhaustion. 24 years old, and she felt as worn as the cracked vinyl on the booth seats. Her life was a repeating cycle of double shifts, lukewarm coffee, and the ever-present knot of anxiety in her stomach. The knot had a name, Leo. Her younger brother, just 17, was fighting a battle that required more than courage. It required money. A lot of it. The medical bills were a mountain, and she was trying to chip away at it with a teaspoon. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a customer who seemed utterly out of place. He was an older man, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored gray suit that probably cost more than her car. His face was etched with a deep, quiet sadness, and his eyes, though sharp, seemed to look at the world from a great distance. He sat alone in a corner booth, ordering only a black coffee, and said nothing for nearly an hour. The other waitresses gave him a wide berth, intimidated by his silent intensity. But Alara saw only a lonely man. When he finally motioned for the check, she brought it over with a small, tired smile. "Hope everything was all right, sir." He simply nodded, placing a few crisp bills on the table. As he stood to leave, Alara's worn apron pocket caught on the edge of the table, spilling its meager contents. A pen, a few coins, and a small, folded photograph protected by a layer of yellowed tape. The photo fluttered to the floor, landing face up. It was the only picture she had of her mother, Lena, who had passed away when Alara was just a child. She bent to retrieve it, but the man's hand was faster. He picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly as his eyes fixed on the smiling face in the photograph. The world seemed to stop. The diner's noise faded into a dull hum. The man's breath hitched, a strangled, wounded sound. He stared from the photo to Alara, his gaze searching, frantic, and filled with a disbelief so profound it looked like pain. "Where?" he whispered, his voice raspy with emotion. "Did you get this?" Alara's heart pounded. That's my mother." The man didn't seem to hear her. He just stared, his face paling, before he turned without another word and walked out, leaving 3 $100 bills sitting next to his untouched coffee. The next day, Alara's shift was thick with a strange anticipation. She kept glancing at the door, her mind replaying the bizarre encounter. The $300 was a godsend, a tiny bit of breathing room in the suffocating pressure of Leo's bills. But the mystery of the man's reaction consumed her. Who was he? Why did a photo of her mother affect him so deeply? Just as she was beginning to think she'd imagined the whole thing, a sleek black car, the kind that whispered of silent, unimaginable wealth, pulled up outside the diner. A chauffeur opened the rear door, and the man from yesterday stepped out. This time he didn't enter. He stood on the sidewalk, waiting. Her boss, a gruff man named Sal, jerked his head toward the door. "Alara, someone for you." Wiping her hands on her apron, she stepped outside, blinking in the afternoon sun. The man's expression was different today. The raw shock was gone, replaced by a guarded, intense scrutiny. "My name is Alistair Sterling," he said, his voice low and steady. It was a name she vaguely recognized from business magazines she sometimes thumbed through on her break. A name synonymous with power, technology, and immense, reclusive wealth. "I'm Alara," she managed, feeling small and out of her depth. "I know," he said, and the simple words sent a shiver down her spine. "I have a proposition for you." It may sound unorthodox, he paused, choosing his words carefully. I require a private chef and household manager for my estate. The work would be demanding, but the compensation would be significant. Enough to solve any financial difficulties you might be facing. Alara stared at him, bewildered. A chef? Sir, I'm a waitress. I can barely make toast without burning it. A flicker of something, was it amusement or pain? Crossed his face. The title is a formality. Your duties would be simple. I need someone there. In the house, his gaze was piercing, as if he were trying to read a story written on her soul. I will pay you $10,000 a week. The number hung in the air, unreal and impossible. $10,000 a week. It was more than she made in 6 months of grueling shifts. It was Leo's medicine. It was the specialist his doctors kept recommending. It was hope, but it made no sense. Why her? Why? She asked, the word barely a whisper. I have my reasons, Alistair Sterling replied, his voice softening slightly. Reasons I believe you, of all people, have a right to understand. But you must come to my home. Please. Miss, what is your last name? Valerius, she said. Alara Valerius. His eyes closed for a brief second, as if her name was a blow. Please, Alara, accept my offer. I promise you, it will be worth your while. Her mind raced. This was crazy. A billionaire offering a waitress an absurdly high-paying job for no reason? It screamed of something sinister, something wrong. But then she pictured Leo's pale face, the hopeful look in his eyes every time she visited, and the stack of red-stamped envelopes on her kitchen table. Her fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Okay, she said, her voice firmer than she felt. I accept. The Sterling estate was not a house. It was a kingdom, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. The sprawling stone and glass mansion was a monument to wealth and isolation. As Alara was led through the cavernous, silent halls by a severe-looking housekeeper, she felt like an intruder in a museum. The air was still, heavy with the scent of old money and secrets. Alistair Sterling, she learned, lived here alone save for a small, rotating staff who were experts in invisibility. Her own quarters were a suite of rooms larger than her entire apartment, with a balcony that offered a breathtaking, lonely view of the sea. Her duties, as Alistair had promised, were vague. She was to oversee his daily menus, which he rarely ate, and ensure the household ran smoothly, which it already did with ruthless efficiency. It was a golden cage, and she was the strange new bird rattling around inside it. Alistair remained a distant, ghost-like figure. He would appear for brief, formal meals, his eyes always finding hers with that same searching, melancholic intensity. They spoke little. He asked about her life, her childhood, her brother. He listened with an unnerving focus, absorbing every detail as if it were a missing piece of a puzzle. Yet he offered nothing of himself in return. The chasm between them felt vast and unbridgeable. One evening, tasked with arranging a small dinner setting in a part of the mansion she hadn't yet seen, Alara found herself walking down a long, sun-drenched corridor. The walls were lined with art, masterpieces that would have been the pride of any museum. But she barely noticed them. She was drawn to the end of the hall, where a single massive portrait was hung, illuminated by a soft, natural light from a skylight above. Her steps slowed. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a painting of a woman, seated in a field of wildflowers, her head tilted slightly, a gentle, knowing smile on her lips. Her hair was the same shade of dark chestnut as Alara's. Her eyes, a warm, deep brown, held the same spark of quiet resilience. The artist had captured not just a likeness, but an essence. A spirit so familiar it made Alara's heart ache. It was her mother. Younger, yes, vibrant and breathtakingly beautiful in a way the single, worn photograph could never convey. But it was, without a shadow of a doubt, Lena Valerius. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. She reached out a hand, her fingers hovering just inches from the canvas, as if she could touch the past. A wave of confusion, grief, and dawning wonder washed over her. What was this? How could a portrait of her mother be hanging in this billionaire's lonely mansion? That's She whispered to the empty hall, her voice cracking with emotion. "That's my mom." Footsteps echoed behind her. It was Alistair. He stood several feet away, his face a mask of sorrow. He had clearly followed her, perhaps knowing where she would end up. "Yes," he said softly. "I know." Before he could say more, another voice, sharp and laced with condescension, cut through the air. "Uncle, what is the meaning of this?" A younger man, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, strode into the gallery. He had a slick, handsome face that was spoiled by a perpetual sneer. He looked Alara up and down, his eyes dismissing her in an instant. This was Marcus Thorne, Alistair's nephew and, as the staff had whispered, the sole heir to the Sterling Empire. "Marcus," Alistair said, his tone hardening. "This is Alara Valerius, my new household manager." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. "Household manager? This is the waitress you dragged here from that greasy spoon? Uncle, have you lost your mind?" He gestured dismissively at Alara. "What is she even doing in here?" "She was just admiring the art," Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet. Marcus's eyes fell on the portrait of Lena, then back to Alara, a flicker of cold recognition in his gaze. "I see. And I suppose she's concocted some sob story for you? Claiming some connection to this woman?" He stepped closer to Alara, his presence predatory. "Let me give you some advice. My uncle is a lonely old man, susceptible to fantasy. But his family is not. Whatever scheme you're running, I suggest you end it now. Take a generous severance and disappear. It will be better for everyone." The accusation stung, hot and humiliating. "I'm not running a scheme," Alara said, her voice shaking with anger. "That woman in the painting is my mother. I don't know why it's here, but it is." "Of course she is," Marcus sneered, turning to Alistair. "Uncle, you can't possibly believe this. It's a pathetic, transparent grift. My father warned me you were becoming eccentric. But this," he sighed dramatically. "I'll have security escort her out." "You will do no such thing," Alistair commanded, his voice ringing with an authority Alara had never heard before. "Alara is my guest. She is to be treated with respect. Do you understand me, Marcus?" Marcus fell silent, his jaw tight with fury. He shot Alara a look of pure venom, a silent promise of future conflict, before turning on his heel and storming out of the gallery. The air crackled with the aftermath of the confrontation. Alara was left trembling, her mind reeling from the whiplash of emotions. One moment, the profound discovery of the portrait. The next, the brutal, cynical attack from Marcus. Alistair moved to her side, his gaze fixed on the painting of Lena. "He is protective of the family legacy," Alistair said, though it sounded more like an indictment than an excuse. He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a deep, unresolved sorrow. "He is wrong about you, and he has no idea what that legacy truly is," he sighed, a sound of immense weariness. "There are things you need to see, things I should have looked at long ago." Hurt by Marcus's accusations but more determined than ever, Alara knew she couldn't back down. The painting wasn't a coincidence, and Alistair's reaction was not one of a man being duped. It was the reaction of a man haunted by the very same face that had smiled at her from a worn photograph her entire life. She had to know the truth. Later that night, Alistair led her not to the grand library or a formal office, but to a small, dusty study at the top of a winding staircase in the mansion's oldest wing. The room was a time capsule, filled with covered furniture and the faint, musty smell of forgotten things. "I haven't been in this room in over 25 years, he confessed, his voice low. He walked over to a heavy, sea-worn wooden chest in the corner and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled among old books and charts, was a small, rosewood box. He handed it to her. "She gave me this, to keep my letters in." Alara's fingers trembled as she opened the box. It was filled with bundles of letters, tied with faded silk ribbons. The handwriting on the top envelope was delicate and familiar. It was her mother's. The other script was bold and masculine. They were love letters, dozens of them, chronicling a passionate, secret romance between Lena Valerius, a spirited young woman who worked at the local library, and Alastair Sterling, the brilliant but shy heir to a vast fortune. She sat on a dust-covered chair and began to read. The letters painted a vivid picture of a love that was deep, genuine, and full of hope. They wrote of stolen afternoons by the sea, of shared dreams of a future far from the suffocating expectations of his family, of a life they would build together. Alastair's letters were full of adoration for Lena's spirit and intelligence. Lena's were filled with love for his kind heart and brilliant mind. But as she read deeper into the stack, the tone began to change. A note of anxiety crept in. Lena wrote of Alastair's family, particularly his older, more ruthless brother, Robert, Marcus's father, who had made his disapproval of her chillingly clear. Alastair, in turn, wrote of increasing pressure, of threats to his inheritance if he didn't end the relationship. Then came the final, heartbreaking letters. One from Lena, full of confusion and pain. Alastair, why have you stopped writing? I wait by the postbox every day. Did I do something wrong? Your family said you left for Europe, that you wanted nothing more to do with me. I don't believe them. I can't. Please, my love, just send me a sign. Beneath it was the last letter from Alastair, creased and tear-stained. Lena, how could you? I received your letter today. To think you found someone else, that our love meant so little you could simply walk away. My brother showed me the note you left. I never thought my heart could break like this. I hope you find happiness, though I fear I never will. Alara looked up, her own tears blurring the ink. A note? What note? My mother would never have. I know that now, Alastair said, his voice thick with regret. I was a fool, young, heartbroken, and easily manipulated by my brother. He told me she had run off with another man. He produced a letter, a forgery, saying she was leaving me. And it seems they told her I had abandoned her. It was a betrayal of stunning cruelty. A love story deliberately, systematically destroyed by a family obsessed with wealth and status. They hadn't just been separated. They had been poisoned against each other, left to believe the worst of the person they loved most. The weight of that manufactured heartbreak, which had defined both their lives, settled heavily in the dusty room. The next morning, the heavy silence of the mansion was shattered by Marcus's return. He didn't bother with pleasantries, cornering Alara in the main foyer. He held a checkbook in his hand. I tried to be polite, he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. But you've clearly decided to double down on this little charade. So, let's cut to the chase. He scribbled a figure on a check and tore it from the book, holding it out to her. It was for $1 million. Take this, he said, his voice a low, menacing purr. Take it and walk out that door. Go back to your diner, take care of whatever problems you have, and forget you ever saw that painting. Forget the name Sterling. This is your one and only chance to walk away with a fortune. If you refuse, I will make it my personal mission to destroy you. I will use every resource at my disposal to paint you as a con artist, a fraud. You will be buried in legal fees you can't afford, and your name will be dragged through the mud until no one will even hire you to wash dishes. Your choice. Alara stared at the check. $1 million. It was an obscene amount of money. It was safety. It was a cure. It was Leo's entire future, guaranteed. Every pragmatic bone in her body screamed at her to take it. What was the truth worth in the end? Her mother was gone. This fight was against a powerful, ruthless family. What could she possibly hope to achieve? She thought of the letters. She thought of the vibrant woman in the painting, her spirit stolen and her heart broken by these very people. She thought of Alastair, a man who had lived for a quarter of a century in a prison of grief built by his own family. And she thought of herself, of the integrity her mother had instilled in her. With a steady hand, she took the check from his fingers. For a fleeting moment, a triumphant smirk played on Marcus's lips. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, she tore the check in half, and then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the polished marble floor. My mother's story, she said, her voice clear and strong, is not for sale, and neither am I. Marcus's face contorted in a mask of pure rage. You stupid, sentimental little fool, he hissed. You have no idea what you've just done. He stormed away, but Alara didn't feel fear. She felt a strange sense of liberation. She had been tested, and she had not broken. Her defiance was the final catalyst for Alistair. Seeing her tear up that check, choosing truth over a fortune, shattered the last of his emotional walls. He had watched the exchange from the top of the grand staircase, and when Marcus was gone, he descended, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and profound sorrow. Your mother would have been so proud of you, he said, his voice choked with emotion. He led her into his private office, a room dominated by a large mahogany desk, and closed the doors. I have been a coward, Alara. I let my grief and my brother's lies wall me up in this house for 25 years. No more. You deserve the whole truth. He sat down heavily, the weight of decades pressing down on him. My brother Robert didn't just want to separate us. He wanted to control the sterling fortune. Our fathers will stipulated that I, as the eldest, would inherit the controlling shares of the company, but only upon my 30th birthday. The affair with your mother happened when I was 28. Robert saw it as a threat. If I married a commoner, he feared our father might change the will. So he didn't just break us up. He broke me. He took a deep, shuddering breath. After he convinced me Lena had left, I was devastated. I retreated from the world, from the company, from everything. Robert stepped in to manage things while I recovered. But my recovery never came. He consolidated power, siphoned funds, and effectively stole the company from under me. I was too lost in my own pain to even notice. I let him. He looked at Alara, his eyes swimming with tears. But that's not the most important part. The letters, they stop abruptly. After I received that forged note, I never tried to contact her again. And she, believing I had abandoned her, eventually stopped writing. But there was something in her last letter, a hint of something she was afraid to tell me. He unlocked a drawer in his desk and pulled out a faded, fragile envelope. This arrived a year after everything. It had been passed through a dozen hands, sent to an old address. I almost threw it away. I only read it last night, after you found the letters. He passed it to her. It was from Lena. Her handwriting was shaky. Alistair, I don't know if you will ever get this. I have to believe that the man I loved wouldn't just disappear. They told me you wanted nothing to do with me, or with our child. I didn't want to tell you like this, but I couldn't bear the thought of you never knowing. I am pregnant. I am going to have our baby. I will love this child enough for the both of us, and I will always, always tell her what a kind and brilliant man her father was, before his family stole him away. I will love you forever. Lena. The world tilted on its axis. Alara dropped the letter, her hands flying to her mouth. The pieces crashed together with the force of a tidal wave. The portrait, the instant connection, his obsession with her photo, her mother's quiet sadness. It all made a terrible, heartbreaking sense. She was pregnant, Alara breathed, the words catching in her throat. With me. Alistair was openly weeping now, the silent, dignified grief of years collapsing into raw, unrestrained sobs. He reached across the desk, his hand covering hers. Yes, he cried. With you, Alara. I'm your father. The revelation hung between them, beautiful and devastating. A father and a daughter, strangers separated by a lifetime of lies, finally finding each other in a tomb of wealth and regret. Their reunion was cut short by Marcus's final, desperate gambit. Believing he had the upper hand, he called an emergency meeting with the Sterling Board of Directors and the family lawyers, summoning Alistair and Alara to the main boardroom. He intended to publicly expose Alara as a fraud and use the incident to have Alistair declared mentally incompetent, securing his control over the company for good. They walked into a room filled with stern, gray-suited men. Marcus stood at the head of the table, a smug, predatory smile on his face. Thank you all for coming, he began. We are here to address a delicate situation regarding my uncle's recent lapse in judgment. But the man who stood beside Alara was not the broken recluse Marcus had known. He was Alistair Sterling, the visionary who had built an empire, his spine straight, his eyes burning with cold fire. "There is no lapse in judgment, Marcus," Alistair said, his voice echoing with power. "Only a long overdue correction. This young woman is not a fraud. She is Alara Valeria Sterling, my daughter." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Marcus scoffed. "Proof? You have no proof. Only the word of a gold-digging waitress." "Oh, I have proof," Alistair said calmly. He placed Lena's letters on the table. He produced the final, damning letter about her pregnancy. And then he played his final card. "My brother was a meticulous villain. But he wasn't the only one who kept records." He nodded to the doorway, where an elderly man in a simple suit stood, holding a worn leather ledger. "This is Arthur, my father's most loyal aide. He watched my brother's every move. This ledger details every illegal transfer, every forged document, every stolen asset Robert used to seize control of this company. It also contains sworn testimony about how he orchestrated my separation from Lena." Marcus's face went white. He stared at the ledger as if it were a snake. His arrogance finally cracked, and raw, ugly fury poured out. "He did it for this family," he snarled, his voice rising to a shout. "He did it to protect our legacy from a common nobody. He did what had to be done, and I would have done the same." In his rage, he had confessed to everything. A small recording device on the table blinked with a tiny red light. The lawyers exchanged grim, knowing glances. It was over. The fallout was swift and absolute. Faced with irrefutable proof of decades of fraud and conspiracy, Marcus Thorne was immediately ousted from the company and disinherited. The legal battle was short. His own confession had sealed his fate. Alistair, with Alara by his side, resumed his rightful place as the head of Sterling Industries, no longer a ghost in his own life, but a leader reborn with a purpose. His first act was to establish the Lena Valerius Foundation, a massive charity dedicated to helping families struggling with medical debt. Leo was moved to the best pediatric hospital in the world, his future bright and secure. Weeks later, the mansion felt different. The silence was no longer heavy and oppressive, but peaceful. Laughter, something the old house had not heard in years, sometimes echoed in the halls. Alara and Alistair stood together in the gallery, before the portrait of Lena. The setting sun cast a warm, golden glow on her painted face, making her smile seem alive. "She would have loved you so much," Alistair said softly, his voice full of a quiet, healing peace. "She did," Alara replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "She always told me my father was a good man who got lost. I'm so glad he found his way back. They were not a billionaire and a waitress. They were not a tragedy of mischances. They were simply a father and a daughter standing in the light, finally home." The story of Alara and Alistair is a powerful reminder that truth, no matter how deeply it is buried by greed or fear, has a way of fighting its way to the surface. It shows that integrity is a fortune far more valuable than money, and that the courage of one person can indeed right the wrongs of generations. How many other truths are out there, waiting for just one person to be brave enough to uncover them? If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of hope and truth, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspirational content.